When I finally had enough money to move away from my mill, she took my daughter without telling me and told everyone I was abandoning the family. My name's Alyssa. I'm 34, and for most of my adult life, I've been holding my world together with quiet tolerance. I work in project management remotely, which means I'm on Zoom 90% of the day, juggling timelines and people I'll never meet in person. I'm married, 12 years this fall, to a man I met in college. He's loyal, kind-hearted, and unfortunately a little too loyal to his mother. Her name is Carol. She's the kind of woman who makes you feel like you're being judged even when she's smiling. A suburban matriarch with church hair and a moral compass that only points outward. She's polite in public, terrifying in private, and has an opinion on everything. When I first met her, I thought she was just intense. That was naive. She didn't hate me, not at first. She studied me. My husband and I moved into her home a year after our wedding. We'd both lost jobs during the 2009 recession, and she offered us her basement suite just until we get back on our feet. That temporary arrangement lasted 5 years. We had our daughter Lila while living under her roof, and from the moment she held her, I knew I wasn't going to be seen as a mother. I was a surrogate, a placeholder, an obstacle to her vision of the right kind of parenting. If I said no sweets, Lila came back with cookies in her pocket. If I wanted to co-sleep during teething, Carol made a fuss about creating dependency. If I dressed my daughter in something fun, colorful, messy, Carol would quietly change her before going out and say it was for photos. Every single time. She made me feel like the intern in my own family. I kept peace for years. I told myself we were saving money. We both worked multiple jobs, paid off our debts, built our credit. But the moment I got promoted to senior PM, with a raise that made mortgage approval a reality, I knew it was time. Time for my house, my rules, my space, where I wouldn't feel like I needed permission to breathe. We told Carol we were buying a house, and I swear she blinked like I'd slapped her. She didn't scream, she just went cold. She told us she was disappointed that we were abandoning the roots of this family, that we were ripping Lila away from the only structure she's ever known. She said all the right words, but her eyes said something else entirely, and I felt it in my gut. This wasn't over. 2 weeks later, it happened. I was on a call with a client when I realized Lila's school hadn't sent the usual pickup confirmation. Checked the app. Nothing. Called the front desk. They said she'd already been signed out by my mother-in-law, without telling me, without asking, without permission. I called her immediately. No answer. Texted. Called again. Nothing. I called my husband. He didn't know either. He left work mid-shift and started driving around 3 hours. That's how long I didn't know where my child was. 3 hours of spiraling thoughts, frantic calls, pacing, crying, panicking. I called the police, started describing what she was wearing, started giving them Carol's make and model. And then the garage door opened. She walked in like she'd just been to the store, smiling, holding Lila's hand. Lila had a balloon, a happy meal, and zero idea what was wrong. Carol just said she was upset. She needed someone stable. I wish I could say I handled it gracefully. I didn't. When Carol walked through that door, cool as air-conditioned sin with my daughter casually licking ice cream like nothing had happened, something inside me just broke, not cracked, snapped. I screamed loud from my gut. Lila froze. Carol tilted her head and smiled like I was the one being ridiculous. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Panic sobbing, the kind you can't hide, the kind that rips your voice raw. I asked her where she'd been. She said I should have trusted her. That she'd never hurt Lila. That I was overreacting. That word. Overreacting. Every woman's favorite poison. The word that makes trauma feel like melodrama. I told her she crossed a line she could never uncross. That what she did was kidnapping. She laughed, said, You can't kidnap your own blood. That's when I called the police back, not to undo the report, but to finish it. I told them she was home now, but I wanted it documented. I wanted it on record. Because next time, there might be a next time. And next time, I might not be home when she comes back. My husband showed up 10 minutes later, walked into a scene he didn't know how to handle. Me crying, the officer asking for ID, Carol sipping tea like she was watching TV, and our daughter curled up on the couch with her shoes still on. He tried to play the middle, said maybe she meant well, said she probably panicked after our announcement, said I should calm down. I looked at him and said, slowly, clearly, she stole our child, and you're defending her. He went silent, and to his credit, this time, he didn't say another word. Not to me, not to her. He just sat down on the stairs and held his face in his hands. That night I packed bags, not for me, for my daughter. I booked a short-term rental, 2 bedrooms, enough space to breathe. I left Carol's house and I told my husband, "You're welcome to join us, but if you stay here, we're not a family anymore." He followed, didn't speak on the drive, just sat in the passenger seat, stunned like a man who just realized his mother wasn't who he thought she was. The next morning, we had dozens of missed calls from his aunts, from his cousins, from his mother's friends, all versions of the same message. She's devastated. You broke her heart. You're destroying the family. Not a single one asked, "Is your daughter okay? How are you holding up? Do you feel safe?" Just gaslighting guilt and gossip. After we left, I tried to focus on rebuilding. I enrolled Lila in a new school closer to our rental, started looking at permanent housing, set up boundaries with my husband, firm ones, weekly therapy, no visits to his mother's house, 0 communication unless it was coordinated through me. He agreed, because even he, for the first time in his life, saw who she really was. But Carol? She didn't just sit back and let go. She declared war, quietly, strategically, and with the kind of manipulative precision only women like her know how to wield. It started with whispers. At Lila's new school, I got a call from the front desk asking why her grandmother had tried to pick her up again. Again. I'd never even given the school her contact info, but she had a friend on the PTA, someone who must have passed her credentials along without asking. I put an immediate block on all pickups. Emergency contacts updated, notes filed, principal alerted. But the seed had been planted. That I was keeping Lila away from her grandmother, not protecting, not enforcing boundaries, just punishing. Next, I found out Carol had been contacting my husband's extended family. She told them she was concerned for Lila's well-being, that I'd become erratic, that I was using the child as leverage. One cousin messaged me directly. She says she's talking to a lawyer, says she's going to fight for custody if this continues. That's when I lost it, because this wasn't about her missing Lila anymore. It wasn't about family. It was about control. She told people I was emotionally unstable, that I had anger problems, that I'd screamed so violently she was afraid for Lila's safety, conveniently omitting that she was the one who took my child without permission. She was laying groundwork, trying to turn the narrative, and worst of all, some people believed her. Even my own mother, who barely knew Carol's, called me and said, "Just be careful how you act right now. You don't want this to get legal." That broke me. Because when someone steals your child and you raise your voice about it and somehow you become the liability, that's the kind of gaslight that burns your entire foundation. So I did what I should have done years ago. I spoke to a lawyer. Not because I wanted to escalate, but because I needed protection. For me, for Lila, from a woman who thought blood gave her permission to rewrite my role as a mother. After that cousin's message about custody, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carol walking Lila out of school again, smiling, justifying, telling herself she was the savior in a story she was quietly burning down. I couldn't afford to hope she'd stop. I'd hoped for that before, and she just got bolder. This time I didn't raise my voice. I raised documents. I called a lawyer the next morning. A woman, sharp, director. Within 5 minutes of explaining the situation, she told me I'd waited too long. She's already building a version of reality where she's the rescuer. You need to own the narrative now, or lose control of it forever. That sentence stuck, because it wasn't just about Carol anymore. It was about protecting my daughter from a future where anyone but me writes her story. And for once, I wasn't alone. My husband sat beside me during that meeting, silent at first, visibly uncomfortable. But when the lawyer asked if we had proof of prior oversteps, he leaned forward and said, "You mean like the time she forged my wife's signature on a school pickup form?" I blinked. He hadn't told me that. He didn't want to worry me. Apparently, weeks earlier, Carol had walked into the school with a printed copy of a parental consent form she claimed I'd signed. Only it was his old signature, forged and 2 years outdated. He hadn't said anything because he thought it was handled. Now he knew better. Something shifted in him that day. I saw it. That wall of denial, the one he'd built out of childhood guilt and "but she's my mom," cracked. He watched the lawyer take notes, list every violation, explain the steps to issue a formal cease and desist, and even a restraining order if necessary. And for the first time, he didn't try to soften it. He just nodded. Later that night, when we got home, he said something that made me cry harder than I expected. "I didn't grow up scared of her like you did, but now I see what she's capable of, and I should have stepped up sooner. I'm here now for both of you." No theatrics, just a simple truth. And that was the first time I felt like we were actually a team. We sent the legal notice the next morning. No calls, no apologies. Just a 3-page letter delivered to her front door by courier with our signatures at the bottom. And do you know what the best part was? She finally went quiet. Not for long. We'd learn that later. But in that moment, for the first time in years, the silence felt like a victory. 2 weeks of silence. That's how long the peace lasted after we sent the legal notice. No calls, no visits, no late-night texts or guilt-tripping voicemails. It almost felt like she understood. Almost. The school had been alerted. Pickup lists were updated. My number was flagged for anything suspicious. We even gave the principal a physical copy of the cease and desist. But people like Carol don't see court documents. They see inconvenient paper, and they don't hear boundaries. They hear insults to their authority. It was a Thursday. Again, I'll never forget that detail because it seems like every time she's taken Lila, it's been on a Thursday. I finished work early and drove to the school just to surprise my daughter, something I hadn't done in weeks. When I pulled into the lot, I didn't see the usual line of parents. That's when I knew something was wrong. I went inside. The receptionist looked up and froze when she saw me. "Oh, Lila already left." I didn't scream. Not this time. I stood there shaking while my breath caught in my throat. She'd done it again. Carol had picked up Lila. Without permission, without notification, without legal right. We later found out how. Apparently, she came during lunch period, brought cupcakes, told the office staff she was taking Lila for a family celebration, said she'd already spoken to the parents, and she smiled. Carol always smiles, because when she's smiling, no one suspects she's doing something dangerous. Just old-fashioned, just over-involved, just a loving grandmother. She took Lila to the lake, sat with her on the pier, fed her lunch, took pictures, laughed, bought her a new dress. When we got to her house an hour later, ready to file a police report, she opened the door like we were early for dinner. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't angry. She was calm. And she said something that made my knees go weak. I just couldn't stand the thought of her spending another day in your chaos. You're not raising her, you're turning her into you, and I won't let that happen. That was it. She truly believed this was righteous. Not malicious, not spiteful. just necessary. To her, I wasn't just a nuisance. I was a threat to the child she believed was more hers than mine. I've seen narcissism before, I've seen manipulation. But that moment, that was delusion, wrapped in love, delivered with a hug and a smile. My husband didn't even speak this time. He just walked back to the car and called the lawyer, because now we weren't talking about visits, or control, or boundaries. Now we were talking about custody, and protection orders, and what happens when love turns into possession. The court spoke, but she still thought the rules didn't apply to her. The courtroom was small, not dramatic, no slammed gavels or shouting matches, just a judge, 2 lawyers, and the feeling that everything we'd been living through for years was finally about to be addressed, in a place where someone actually had the power to stop it. Carol showed up in full church mode. Powder blue suit, pearl necklace, folders in hand, face like she was walking into a Bible study, not a custody hearing. She greeted the judge like an old friend, called the bailiff son, smiled at our lawyer, and said she hoped we could all come to a peaceful understanding. The performance was immaculate, but it didn't last. Our lawyer laid it all out. The unauthorized pickups, the forgery attempts, the false narratives about abuse, the cease and desist she ignored. The judge asked Carol one simple question. Can you explain why you took the child from school without informing the parents? Carol's response. Because I'm her grandmother, and clearly I'm the only one thinking about her emotional well-being. That child is overstimulated, undernourished, and surrounded by moral chaos. She told me she doesn't even get hot oatmeal for breakfast. Just cereal. It would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. The judge cut her off, explained calmly, but firmly, that what she did was not just inappropriate, but illegal. That parental boundaries are not optional, that this wasn't about personal feelings. It was about safety and legal rights. Carol didn't respond. She looked around the room like she'd just realized no one else was clapping. Like the audience had turned on her in the 3rd act of her one-woman play. The court issued a formal restriction on unsupervised visits. Everything would go through us. No school pickups, no solo outings, nothing without written, notarized permission. For a week, things were calm. Until we got a visit from Child Services. A caseworker knocked on our door with a clipboard and a folder, asking if we could do a quick walkthrough. Why? Because someone had filed a report claiming our home was emotionally and spiritually unsafe for a child. That the mother had violent outbursts, that the child was being brainwashed against her extended family, that we allowed media that glorified rebellion and witchcraft. The caseworker didn't say who reported it, but they didn't have to. She walked through our modest but clean apartment, saw the tidy kitchen, the artwork Lila had drawn on the fridge, the 3 bins of Lego, and the dog sleeping on the couch. She asked me a few questions, asked Lila if she felt safe. Lila said, "My mom's my favorite person." I nearly broke down. The caseworker smiled, closed her folder, and said, "This is one of the most normal homes I've walked into this month." That report? It made it back to the judge, and this time he wasn't patient. He ordered a full review of Carol's influence, her calls, her messages, her interventions. He used the phrase, pattern of overreach rooted in emotional instability. When the final order came, it was brief. Supervised visits only, once per month in a neutral location. No more pickups, no more family days, no more lake trips. Carol ranted online for weeks, posted on church forums that her granddaughter was being stolen by liberal ideology, told anyone who'd listen that the system had turned against Christian family values. She tried to report us again, this time saying we were teaching the child to disrespect elders. The agency closed the case in 24 hours, and just like that, she faded. Not gone, but contained. Not harmless, but finally powerless. It's been 8 months since the final order was issued. Carol still gets to see Lila. Once a month, supervised, neutral location, a family resource center with cameras, a mediator, and a clock on the wall that doesn't lie. It's not jail, but it's not freedom either, and that's exactly what it needed to be. The first few visits were awkward. Carol tried to play the part. Hugs, cookies, presents, stories about the old days. But something was different now, and it wasn't just the setting. Lila was different, not colder, not afraid, just aware. She'd seen enough, she'd heard enough, she remembered enough. One day after a visit, she asked me, "Why does Grandma always cry when I talk about you?" And I said, "Because sometimes when people lose control, they pretend they're sad instead of admitting they were wrong." She didn't say anything, just nodded. She understood more than I ever expected her to. Carol tried to regain control in subtle ways. She brought religious pamphlets to visits, tried to slip notes into Lila's backpack, once whispered that real families don't use courts. The mediator shut it down each time. She lost her warnings. She lost her privileges. And eventually, she just stopped trying. Now she comes, sits, smiles, reads a book, gives a gift, hugs goodbye, goes home. She doesn't call. She doesn't message. She doesn't interfere. Because she can't. And the best part? Lila doesn't orbit around her anymore. She loves her in the simple, honest way children love people who once made them laugh. But she doesn't obey her. She doesn't fear her. She doesn't depend on her. Carol is just Grandma now, not a third parent, not a shadow decision maker, not the voice behind my shoulder. As for us, we moved into our own place last month. 3 bedrooms, soft carpet, a backyard that needs work but feels like ours. My husband, he grew. He speaks up now. He sees things before I have to name them. And the man who once sat silent on the stairs now speaks clearly in every parent-teacher conference, every doctor visit, every quiet moment when our daughter asks, "Are we safe now?" Yes, we are. I don't regret how hard I had to push. I don't regret the police report, the court, the fight. Because sometimes, to protect your child, you have to let people call you cruel, let them call you dramatic, let them leave. And then, when the noise fades, you look at your child, still whole, still laughing, and realize you won. Not because the court said so, but because you didn't give up when everyone told you to be the bigger person. Thanks for listening. And if you're where I was, if someone in your life thinks love gives them ownership, let this be proof. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to take back what was always yours. And you're allowed to make peace that doesn't include everyone, especially the ones who never saw you as enough to begin with.